So we're going to do this dedication of the shir for Gavin's mom, Sylvia Stollar. Your mom's name was Sylvia, wasn't she? Yeah.
And Sylvia Rachel Stollar, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about one or two good method of hers. I'm sure she had hundreds, but at least one or two, so we can just get a bit of an essence. Because you in part have made an amazing transformation because of the influence that she must have had on you in some way.
100%. So my mom, I got along quite well with my mom. So that was quite good. And I think she spent a lot of time trying to raise my brother and I. And I think we were more than a handful. Same like you and your but I think pretty much the same thing. So my mom had to, I think she grappled with it, My dad didn't get that much involved. So my mom was directly involved and took us, to play sport or whatever. She was more directly and hands-on. And she was just a lovely person, And I really was unfortunate because I didn't have that much time. I didn't really know when I was a youngster. Because when I got older, I went to the States. I was in Israel, the States. Then I was in Cape Town for a long time. So when I finally came back up to South Africa, and I was a proper adult and a lot more mature. Well, I don't know about a lot more mature, but I looked older. So I really wanted to spend time with her. And then unfortunately, she picked up this colon cancer. Not colon cancer, liver cancer. And yeah, within 3 months, she passed away. So anyway, absolutely lovely person. And unfortunately, I only really have memories of her more when I was a youngster, because I didn't really get to spend a lot of time with her when I was older, which is unfortunate. Because you look at it through a different lens when you're an adult as opposed to a child.
Sure.
Anyway, one of my regrets. All right, she was a lovely person. That's all I can say.
Well,
I just think there's a lot of missed opportunities there. That's all.
Yeah, I think we've all missed opportunities, and Sham, I'm sorry you did, because it's not nice that. But anyway, just as I think this is important, and I just
But that's why you mustn't always bank, guys. This is a good lesson. Don't always bank on it. There's something that you can do in the future. So I always thought, oh, well, I can do it with my mom in the future because she's still young. She's only 72. I've got like another maybe like 30 years with her. I can make up for it, That was my whole plan. I never got that opportunity ever. Anyway, I'm just saying. So if you can do it, start doing a mitzvah. Something with your parents, do it now.
Right. Well, I think that is a good lesson, is to take opportunities in the present, because you might not have that opportunity in the future. And I think if we can just draw that lesson alone, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
So before we get started, I'm just going to go through a couple of concepts. So, guys, Kevin, I know you got to meet your niece. I put you just on mute because there was a lot of background noise. And I just want to do one thing for you guys quickly, if you don't mind. I'll show you what that is now. I'll show you right now. I want to share the screen for something important. And this is what I managed.
You did find it.
Yeah, on the YouTube video.
No, so this picture is actually my dad. That's not so good. This is actually quite a nice picture.
Yeah. So that's your mom between you and Jeff.
Between me and Jeff, yeah.
Okay, so we wish you long life.
Yeah, this is a lovely picture. We'll use that. That's fine. My dad's I need to get touched up. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right.
There's AI companies today that do it for you.
Okay, so let's just cover a bit of ground. Kevin, your niece is meeting you at the end of the year, I'm assuming. That's right. We've got about a half an hour left. About 10 minutes. Right, let's see what we can accomplish. So what I might do is just give you a little bit of a background overall before we go into the analysis. In other words, what I was thinking of doing is giving you the analysis first and then giving you a bit of a summary, but we might be able to do it the other way around. So the first thing is that Rava noted a contradiction because we learned in a Mishnah, and if you remember, that was in Shavuos chapter 7, verse 1, that basically from among the dyes, aftergrowth of safflower and woad are subject to Shemitah sanctity. Now, I'm just going to go through the overall concepts and I'm going to analyze it. And the money paid for them, if you remember, is subject to Shemitah sanctity. They are subject to the requirement of removal bi'ur, and the money for them is subject to the requirement of removal. Okay? So what are we actually saying here? Step by step. I think we can't just do a brush over, because otherwise you're just not going to know what the heck's going on. So we're just going to do the best we can in half an hour. So if you remember in Shavuos, the whole Gemara was stating that there's certain major rules concerning Shemitah. The one of it is that there are three categories. The one is human food, the other one is animal food, and the other one is dye stuff or byproducts that are not fit for consumption, including dyeing fabric, etc. And those dye stuffs were not artificial in those days. All of the products that you get initially had, whether it was indigo or gentian violet or mercurochrome, comb, everything had its base in plants. Okay. And we're saying that if it doesn't endure in the ground, it's subject to the sanctity of Shemitah. So what do we mean is that you've got perennials. Now, perennials are something that last year in, year out, and are not man-grown, or even if they are man-grown originally, if they're not grown during the Shemitah year, and you can kind of leave them and the environment can take care of those plants, then even if it was man-grown originally, but the environment is able to sustain it. In other words, it's not a foreign crop that needs continual replanting. Generally, your grains, whether it be maize or wheat, need continual replanting, and you need to do crop rotations, etc. But certain perennial plants, etc., last year in and year out, and it doesn't matter whether it was there in the natural environment or just happened to succeed in the natural environment and it was man-grown, as long as it was prior to the Shemitah and prior to the year before. So if it's perennial, it's not subject to the sanctity of Shemitah. Okay, but if there is a certain life expectancy and there's work involved, you've got issues that happen in the 6th year and issues that happen in the 7th year. Okay, so what we are saying is that there are such plants, for example, like safflower and woad, that what happened is they spilled seeds in the 6th year, and in the 7th year they started to grow. But the problem is it's on a ticking clock because it's not a perennial. So either the animals within the field will finish them, at which case you no longer can use it for yourself or your animals, or alternatively, the environment is going to be hostile and they will no longer exist. So that is seeds dropped in the 6th year, not in the Shemitah year. So you can use it in the 7th year, but you can't plant in the 7th year. But you can only use it up until the time at which the deadline is there. And that deadline is, again, one of two things. Either the environment doesn't sustain it, or B, the animals have consumed it. And the only reason they haven't consumed yours is you picked it prior to it. So whether you picked it prior to which storage to feed your animals, which is one of the categories, or to feed yourself, or to use it perhaps to dye fabrics, at that point you have to get rid of it if it's no longer in the field, because then you're on borrowed time. And you're making use of it during the Shemitah year, technically, which is a problem. So that's the basis of the discussion. Now, we've also got part of the discussion about sanctity of Shemitah and how it transfers. The other way to transfer it, Rashi calls it the business, if you use it for business. So what does he mean for business? It's got two different definitions. The one is for commercial use, meaning you're not using it for your own animals or your own self, but you use it in order to trade. So that's forbidden. But the core essence of what it's forbidden, and the other subject that gets ensconced by this particular topic is the continuation at the time where it has to be removed, bi'ur. So what do we mean for business? It's not the commercial transaction that's the problem. I don't know where Arthur's gone. I think he's coming back. Okay. So it's not, I remember that place. It was only a week ago, Arthur and I enjoyed food there. Beautiful. So and they always have electricity. It's always a plus. So the other aspect is this thing about, as Rashi calls it, doing business with Shemitah stuff, meaning that what's the whole point of bi'ur removal? It's about, Kevin, not being able to take benefit in the Shemitah year past its time where the ground won't sustain it or the animals have consumed the product. So what happens is, if I take fruit or vegetables, or I take certain woods and I make furniture out of it, or perhaps let's say I take some plants and I make dye out of it and fabric, there's a certain permanence to it. So there's two types of permanence. The one is that if you sell it commercially, you earn money. Now that money, you've got rid of it before the stage bi'ur. You got rid of it, fine. But bi'ur, as far as Rashi is concerned, there's an argument with Tosfot and Rashi and the Ramban and the Rambam. The Rambam says you have to destroy it, and the Ramban says you can leave it for other animals to consume it. But according to the Rambam, Maimonides, the issue is complete destruction of it. So if you sell an item and you get cash, that Shemitah sanctity goes from that item to the cash you receive, because you're sustaining the benefit. And the whole point of bi'ur, the removal, is to remove that benefit. So that's what Rashi terms as doing business, is creating a continual benefit past the time you're allowed. If you happen to sell it, it's not the fact that you're doing business, it's the sustainability of getting the benefit beyond the time allowed. Now, we hold then that occurs even if it's not the original item. So the Shemitah sanctity goes from the item itself now to the money that you've gotten for it. Now, say you get rid of the money and you buy a car, then the car's got Shemitah sanctity in a way, because it was gotten from ill-gotten gains, in the sense that you weren't allowed to benefit from proceeds past a certain point. So that's part of the issues that we are going to discuss about how that transfers. And obviously, if it's subject to the requirement of removal, and then and you have to get rid of it, then that's going to affect the three categories. Obviously, human consumption, animal consumption, and byproducts that you can use like dye or wood for furniture, etc. Now, the third example in the Mishnah was not wood or byproducts, but specifically dyestuffs, and they don't endure in the ground, and therefore they're subject to Shemitah sanctity and bi'ur. So the reason why I used the aftergrowth of safflower and wood and woad is because at a certain point they're not going to endure within the Shemitah year. So you drop seeds in the 6th year, halfway through the 7th year they start to die out because the seasons change, or the animals might have consumed them. Either way, because they don't endure, they are subject to Shemitah sanctity. Now, the problem with that is that when you're looking at it, the Mishnah is saying that you can't you can't plant it during Shemitah. The whole reason it uses the word aftergrowth is it was actually seeds per force, as the Gemara says, that were planted in the previous year, in year 6. And therefore, you've got some of the benefit in year 7, which is allowed because you didn't plant in year 7, but there's a cut-off point at which the environment or the ground will no longer sustain it, or the weather. So then the problem with the dyestuffs is very, very simple, is that what happens when you dye an item? Is it permanent or temporary? Well, generally it's permanent on clothing. Why? Because the whole point you're dyeing it is that you're going to keep clothing for many years, and that particular fashion in vogue, by the color that you dye the fabric, like a pink or whatever, is going to sustain for years. Therefore, you're not allowed to do it. That's why we learned, if something is Shemitah sanctity, you've got to burn it rather than use it. If you use the ola of the peels or the fruit, you've got to kind of burn it. So this is going back to the previous Gemara's question, is dye something inherent in it? In other words, if it embeds in the fabric and is permeated within the fabric, do you have to pay a separate fee if you robbed two different people? But right now we're just dealing with Shemitah sanctity, and therefore You cannot, it's one of the prohibitions. You cannot do it. Okay? Because of the permanence of fabric, keeping the dye in it. Now, we are saying something else, is that if you sell the dyed fabric and you get money, that's also subject to Shemitah sanctity, and you've got to remove it. Anything that's going to sustain it, whether it's a dye, a byproduct, or anywhere along the process, it has it. But the problem is, it says at a certain point, it seems as though wood is subject to Shemitah sanctity, and I'm going to explain to you what it means. Okay. So first, another concept I want to explain to you is that there's a second concept with Shemitah about benefit and consumption. Okay. So, in other words, the whole reason that we talk about the first two categories being animal food and then human food is that you getting it during that period of the 7 year before you have to basically get rid of it, removal with biur, and then you're getting the benefit as you're eating the what do you call it, the aftergrowth. Why? Because there's no permanence. So what's this thing about benefit before consumption and benefit after consumption? So benefit before consumption, or should we say benefit at the same time as consumption is allowed. So why is it allowed? Because, listen, if you've eaten the food, is there anything to remove? No. There's nothing to remove. If you dye something and there's a permanent, is there something to remove, guys? Yes. That's why it's prohibited. So that's why it goes into this particular issue of when are you getting the benefit and when is it being consumed? Okay. So how do I put it is that you can use the plants up to the time of removal to, like, for example, burn a fire, because it's similar to eating. So anything that removes it, whether you eat the product up until the time where the environment, just let me close the door, guys. This is just bugging me. Give me a second. Just give me a second. Okay. So, what I'm not paused. Okay. So what I was going to say is you've got to understand what we're talking about here. So there's certain things that if there's a time to give it up, you're either going to give it up and get no benefit, or the getting rid of it is the benefit you're going to receive. So if you're eating the food, are you enjoying it? Yes, you're getting benefit, you're getting the nutrition, and then at the same time you're getting rid of it. That's allowed. The problem that's not necessarily allowed is a case where you're getting the benefit only after you got rid of it, because you're continually benefiting from Shemitah produce and you're not allowed to continually get benefit. That's the whole reason that you can't keep the permanence of it. So that's the problem. You get what I'm saying? Okay. So how do we know this? Is the Torah states in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 6 and 7, the Sabbath produce of the land shall be yours to eat, and for your animals, and for the beasts that are in your land. And in Gemara Pesachim 52b, it says that as long as the type of vegetation is still available in the fields for beasts, you may keep the picked fruit of that species in your house to feed your animals or yourself. If the species is no longer available in the fields for the beasts, you must remove what was set aside for you or your animal from the house. Okay. So those items possess Shemitah sanctity, and they are subject to removal. But if there's an item that is not subject to Shemitah sanctity, you don't have to get rid of it, because they remain available to animals in the fields throughout the winter. Okay. Now, so why are we mentioning this issue of evidently wood is subject to Shemitah sanctity? That's what I wanted to get to know in the Gemara. So there is a commentary by Rashi that says that if you look at safflower and woad, it's used for dyes. So what do you mean wood? What's the definition of wood? So one of the definitions of wood-like products are subject to being categorized as wood because they're non-edible plants, meaning dye stuff by its very nature cannot be consumed. It's poisonous. You have you falling asleep and Arthur's disappeared off the screen. Kevin's on the walkabout.
No, let me
Arthur?
I had a long day, Johnny. You know, I had a long day. Sorry.
I know. So, guys, this is important because I don't want
No,
to.
I'm just going to sit up. I don't do that often.
Okay. So
what? I'll drink some water. Sorry.
Okay. So what I'm saying, Arthur, is as follows: is that what is evidently wood stuffs have Schmitter sanctity got to do with dye products, because they seem like two different things. So Rashi brings a commentary saying, listen, there's two types of wood. There's wood that looks like wood, there's proper wood, and there's wood that, in terms of its functionality, you can't eat it. So if it's like the bark and the tree trunk, you can make utensils out of it, you can make chairs and stuff, and dyes, you can change the color of clothing with it, but you can't eat it. And therefore there's a permanence by making furniture, and there's a permanence with regards to utensils, etc., but there's no permanence if it's foodstuffs that you can consume. So safflower and woad are meant for dyes, but they are like wood in the sense that they're not meant for human consumption or even animal consumption. They're non-edible plants. So the whole Gemara's point is that we can see from this Mishnah that even plants that are not used for food are also subject to Shemitah sanctity. You get what I'm saying? Because up until this point, guys, what we thought is that only things that were used as food are subject to Shemitah sanctity because you've got to get rid of them. In other words, the consumption is enjoyed at the same time as the benefit. In other words, you're destroying it while you're enjoying it. That's okay. So we thought that was fine, but then we thought all of a sudden that if there was a permanence to it, maybe it's not subject to Shemitah sanctity. Have you guys got it, or you don't have it? Are you a bit confused?
No, I'm fine.
Kev?
I'm a bit confused. I'm going to have to go through the thing again with
okay, so tell me what you need, mate, while I'm here.
No, no, I just have to go through it again. I'm tired, but I'm going to... I'm confused about everything. This is complicated. It's not easy. I mean, on the one hand, you're saying you can, if you eat it, you get benefit from it, you're allowed it. The other one says it's permanent, not eating it, you still can't use it.
Okay, all right. So let me clarify. Let me clarify points that you are aware of before we do points you're not. So you are aware of one thing, is that we're not talking about things you plant in the 7 year, because for sure you can't have any of that. You're aware of that, number one. That you're aware of, not. Fine. You're aware we are talking about aftergrowth, which means it's planted in the 6th year, and the only reason you're getting benefit in the 7th year is it wasn't planted in the 7th year. You're aware of that. Point 2. Nod?
That's not something new that I didn't catch about the 6th and the 7th.
Yeah, I can hear you. I had a reference.
Okay, you cleared something up here.
So, point number 2 is it was seeds that were dropped in the 6th year. You're getting benefit in the 7th. There's no ways you can get benefit from things that were planted in the 7th year. We are asking, if you drop seeds in the 6th year, can you get benefit in the Shemitah year if it's still growing? Because you didn't plant it in the 7th year. That's the second point. And the answer is yes, providing 2 factors. Whichever comes first, is that if all the animals eat it, and you've got a storehouse full of the stuff, but all the animals eat it, then you're on the clock. You've got to get rid of everything. Your storehouses, you've got to get rid of it, because it's there to feed the animals or whoever needs it in the fields or whatever the case may be. That's fine. So when that happens, bi'ur, removal. Bi'ur just means remove. Get rid of it. Okay. The second thing of it is, say there's no animals in the fields to consume it and it's there, but the environment becomes hostile. Either the soil changes or the weather conditions make it too frosty or too hot, and they start to die naturally. At that point, the fact that you've preserved it means you meddling in God's affairs, because the ground has to rest and you're getting benefit after the time when nobody should be getting benefit. So if it's sustained by the ground, there's benefit. Just hang on a second, I've got to plug in my laptop. If it's sustained by the ground or the environment, you can continue getting the benefit. If it's not, you can't. If the animals all consume it, even if the environment will allow for it, then you can't get benefit in your storehouse. Can you get that concept so far? Okay, fine. If you got that benefit so far, then that's great. So I'm going to read the whole thing and then explain it. So, so it says, Rava noted a contradiction we learned in a Mishnah from among the dyes, sapphire and woad. The aftergrowth are subject to Shemitah sanctity, and the money paid for them is subject to Shemitah sanctity, as I explained. Let me just pause the shiur, guys. Give me a second. Okay. So, and the money paid for them is subject to Shemitah sanctity. As we said, Arthur, the one other concept is that not only do you have to get rid of those items if they're no longer available in the field for either environmental or animal consumption reasons, you cannot sell them just before the storehouse worth of stuff and keep the money that you benefited, because you're perpetuating the benefit. You understand that? Fine. You can't use dye stuff specifically because it makes a permanent improvement to the clothing and you're continually getting benefit year after year, even during the Shemitah year. You get that? So the perpetuation, whether you convert it into money or have dye stuffs, or you can't do. And if you use the money and you buy an item with it, that then transfers Shemitah sanctity to that. So any of the knock-on effects of what was originally Shemitah past the time of bi'ur, you can't use. Got that? That part's fairly straightforward. But so they're subject to the removal, and the money paid for them is subject to the requirement of removal or any benefit. So evidently wood is subject to Shemitah sanctity, and all it's saying there is, if sapphire and woad is a dye and is not fit for human consumption, we seem to see that even wood might be subject to Shemitah sanctity because we can get benefit from it, and yet it's not fit for human consumption, basing it on the fact that the dye stuff is prohibited past a certain time. So now we're asking the question, is wood prohibited after a certain time? Because you can't, because if it gets Shemitah sanctity like dye stuff, it means you can't use wood past a certain time. So that's the question. In other words, say you've got seeds that were dropped in the 6th year, and now there's little wood that developed from there, and you can make like knives and forks and things like that. Can you use that, or do you have to get rid of that also because it gets Shemitah sanctity, like food? Okay, I know Arthur's coming back. Let's wait for him a sec. Okay. Okay, Arthur, you're with me now, but we've only got a few minutes. I know that was important in the grand scheme of things. I'm not sure why, but so what we are saying is, up until now, Arthur, the concept is we thought that only dyed stuffs, animal food, and human food was prohibited and got Shemitah sanctity. The question the Gemara is asking now is, does wood get Shemitah sanctity? In other words, if you drop seedlings in the 6th year and there's little wood that develops in the 7th year because there's a bark and everything, is that subject to Shemitah sanctity because it's not part of your 3 categories in the Mishnah? And they're saying, well, why would you think would get Shemitah sanctity? So, Kevin, why would you think? I thought of you with a pun. Okay. So, so the thing of it is, Arthur, that the reason Rashi said you might think that wood would get Shemitah sanctity is because, I can't do that with a straight face, that wood can get Shemitah sanctity is because it resembles dye stuff in the fact that you can't eat it. So if dye stuff is, then maybe wood is. But it's a bit of a stretch that the Gemara is asking that, because it's not part of the three categories in Shavuos chapter 7, verse 1. So it's saying, can you extend that to wood? In other words, if wood that grew in the 6th year, planted in the 6th year, grew in the 7th, was subject to Shemitah sanctity, you've got to get rid of the wood when it was no longer sustainable in the fields or the animals knocked it over. So Rava himself says there's a contradiction in the brisa, because it says the leaves of cane reeds and the leaves of grapevines that one gathered up from across the field to put into storage, if you gathered them for food, they got Shemitah sanctity. But if you gathered them for wood, in other words, to burn a fire or cook food with them, they don't have Shemitah sanctity. So the whole point that the Gemara is saying is that there's a contradiction between the Mishnah and between the brisa, because what's happening is the brisa is turning around and saying, look, wood doesn't have Shemitah sanctity. It's clear. It's very, very clear. And how do we know that? Because if you gathered up cane reeds and the leaves of grapevines and you want to make a braai from it and a fire and cook food, you can do that. You can keep that in storage in case you need to have a braai in the 7th year. There's no issue. So they're not subject to Shemitah sanctity, but it seems as though in the Mishnah in Shavuos chapter 7, verse 1, that it does have Shemitah sanctity, because it's saying that safflower and woad have got like woody parts to it, or in terms of their bark, which you can use for dye, or it's certainly not edible and it's within that category. So we're saying, how do we resolve the contradiction? Now, that all I wanted to do is bring up and explain to you what the questions are. And how do we know that? Because the leaves, you've got leaves, so the leaves of cane reeds and the leaves of grapevines that you've gathered up and you put into a storage unit, if you gathered them for food, you've got to get rid of them at the time of Bi'ur, because they have Shemitah sanctity, because it's part of the category of animal food or human food, which is subject to Shemitah sanctity. But if you've used it because you want to create a braai and use it as firewood, it's not subject to Shemitah sanctity. And since we've got a contradiction between the brisa and the Mishnah, which implies that it is subject to Shemitah sanctity, we have to know how to resolve the contradiction. And we're going to do the issue this next year. I hope I made a bit of sense, guys. I try to break it down piece by piece.
Yeah, sure.
Arthur?
It's tricky, but
I know something's distracting you. Okay, so Arthur, tell me what's not clear. We've got 4 minutes anymore.
No, I'm not understanding. What set it up was the thing about the 6th to 7th year if you planted before it. I didn't catch it, I didn't hear it. Obviously, I thought it was. But look, it's I mean, the only thing I don't understand is what can't be. Is it grain? Is it everything? Is it just dyes or?
Okay, it's an excellent question. So let me answer it. Is that 7th year you can't? It's all forbidden if you plant in the 7th year. But the 6th year, it puts it into 3 categories: human food, animal food, and dye stuffs. It doesn't talk about wood. So we want to know what to do with stuff that's wood. That seeds were dropped in the 6th year, and in the 7th year, do you have to get rid of it, or can you keep it in your storage unit? And the brisa seem to say, if you kept it for firewood, it doesn't have Shemitah sanctity, and you can use it continue using it. But if you've kept that wood for some sort of animal food, like animal fodder, like straw, for example, which isn't fit for human, then it gets Shemitah sanctity. You've got to get rid of it by the time the natural environment can't sustain it, or animals have eaten it in the field, then you can't use your storage as a protective mechanism to get out of biur. So we're saying, what is the category of wood? So the Bryce is saying it depends on your intention. What is it for? And the Mishnah is seeming to say that no, it's classified as woad and similar to sapphire and woad, which is dye stuffs, meaning if it's not fit for human consumption, it could be that category, and it could be Shemitah sanctity. So we're saying, well, is it Shemitah sanctity or not? So Rabbi is going to make is going to resolve the conflict, is going to resolve the contradiction. He's going to do a conflict resolution in the next year as to whether we can use wood during Shemitah or not. And we're going to see it has to do with, number one, what do you want to use the wood for? And number two, what is the common usage of that wood by most people? In other words, are they byproducts? Are they issues? It's not only byproducts, but is there going to be a delayed benefit to consumption? So the next time we're going to learn about this concept of, is the benefit at the time of consumption or delayed? The intent, the general intent, and the gatherer's intent. So these are the complexities that are going to come. But guys, you understand what's going on so far. And this year is also just done as a review from David Meyer Ben Rav Shmuel Mendel, who basically came out of an anesthetic, please God, for